Some days I have trouble devoting myself to a spiritual practice. How about you? Welcome to Common the Chaos Interfaith Center, where there's not really religion, but there are a lot of ideas and questions about connecting to the divine intelligence that we call God. First off, please mark your calendar for our book share that comes on July 16. It's a Saturday morning to get yourself grounded. Remember last week's God Talk? And to start the weekend right. So, how about you? Do you devote yourself to doing something that spiritually grounds you and moves you forward on your spiritual journey? Is it a daily practice or a couple times a week? Or is listening to God Talk your spiritual journey? Do you add in perhaps a yearly retreat, or do you go on a vision quest once every few years? Well, the reason I'm asking is that devoting ourselves to spiritual practice is one of the three legs of the Celtic spirituality stool. The other two are studying and service to others. Let's break it down. Spiritual practice means something that we do to connect us to the greater source of love, the divine intelligence, the Great Spirit, or God, however you perceive them to be. Spiritual practice moves us forward in our soul's maturity. The practice is sometimes called a spiritual discipline or doing spiritual exercises. Every religion offers its own ways of developing a spiritual practice and may include chanting or fasting, praying, walking a labyrinth, reading a devotional material, or memorizing sacred texts. But just about anything we do can become a spiritual practice if we set an intention for the activity. Take gardening, for example. Sure, I can pull weeds and push wheelbarrows full of mulch around the yard, and I can build up a sweat and make the gardens look like a Pinterest post, and that's gardening. But if I connect my heart to the activity in such a way that the soil and the zucchini flowers and the raspberries are not mine to own, then I see them as God's miracles shining through, and they're not just leaves and stems and roots. They are awesome examples of natural creation. I am but a caretaker of this soil and these plants. And when I cultivate the soil, I thank it for providing nutrients. When I harvest the tomatoes, I thank the plant for creating that which sustains and nourishes me. This, in turning the work of gardening into a spiritual practice, is what I'm talking about today. It connects me to everything around me. Daily practice can include reading a text from the Bible, or from a modern poet, or from a book written by a spiritual director. The nature connection for followers of Jesus is both very new and very old. In the early days of people learning about Jesus, the idea of God's omnipresence was widely accepted. Salvation, with the notion that Jesus died on a cross to absolve us from sins, wasn't in the bright lights on the marquee back then. Nature was how the Celts knew God, through deep breathing, through the fur of a dog, through the shade of an oak tree. The Celts felt God around them and in them and through them. And then the hierarchy of Roman religion moved north from Rome, and the idea of God being up there in heaven and our repenting for sin so we could end up there in heaven became the way. That which moves us to understand God, to be one with God, without fanfare or parades or holidays, is spiritual practice. It can release some of the heavy lifting for our souls and allow us to be, not make us to be, who we are as divine people. Spiritual exercises or practices help us to be at peace, whatever happens. To release anxiety, to realize that we were created to be in perfect union with the holy divine. We're not in control of anything. And once we can truly feel that, anxiety can fall away. Spiritual practice allows us to follow our own path, to search and seek and doubt and question, and clarity will come if we are vulnerable and open to possibility. Spiritual practice moves us towards living together as everyone's neighbor. Difficult to do in these times of such strong divisions. Here are some ideas to try as spiritual exercises. Despite the ugliness towards the LGBTQ community during Pride Month, despite the Confederate flag being displayed on passing trucks even as we celebrated Juneteenth, despite the dismissing of me as a woman pastor by males in the pulpit, we can rise above. We can choose to adopt a new habit that will enrich our souls and move us a step towards soul maturity. Rise above. Choose not to argue on the level of the oppressor. Put on a mantle of golden light right around your shoulders and let it drape all the way to the floor. And don't allow ourselves to become engaged in angry discourse. State our position, justify it while smiling perhaps, entertain the other person's point of view, and confirm that civility leads us to loving our neighbors. Oh, this is not easy. I can get very angry at the man in the red t-shirt with white letters saying Jesus saves while he's at the Pride Parade telling people they're going to hell. So I put my clerical collar on last week and tossed my rainbow stole over my shoulder and just stood beside him for a while, not saying a word. Smiling at the parade goers, letting them know he's not the only voice in town. And letting them see that there's hope and that God, the God I know, loves each and every one of them dearly. How do we rise above when other people make decisions that affect our lives? What spiritual practice can possibly help when anger courses through my veins at the thought of a 14-year-old girl having to bear the emotional and physical suffering of enduring a pregnancy and bearing a child that is a result of her stepfather raping her? How can I use my knowledge of a loving God to address the plight of a woman who was unknowingly pregnant and had multiple x-rays of her abdomen after falling down a flight of stairs, devastatingly harming that fetus? What do I do with my anger? How can I help her? First, I study and remember history. Quoting the Bible to validate or make political decisions is wrong. Using the Bible to inform my decisions can be done with the full understanding that how I interpret the scriptures is personal and may be different from someone else. This is where religious freedom comes into play. The laws of our land are supposed to uphold the premise that you and I may interpret the sacred text differently, but that both of us will be respected. Passing a law that disallows one of us to exercise our religious freedom is always wrong, and the Supreme Court's overturning of abortion rights violates Jewish religious freedom. A principle in Jewish law is that the preservation of a human life overrides nearly all other religious considerations, which also allows a woman to seek an abortion, especially if her own life is in danger. And with the current mental health crisis in our nation, I offer that to use only physical concerns as the criteria for a woman's life being in danger is utterly naive. A woman's mental state can also be criteria for her life being in danger. Regardless of your position on this particular issue, I believe you should be deeply concerned that the highest court has the power to control our bodies, or the body of a woman you love. How do I act on my concern? By absorbing this issue into my spiritual practice. To me, loving a woman in her suffering is the work I need to do. Passing a law isn't going to end the act of becoming unpregnant. In 1967, 42% of maternal deaths in this country were attributed to, quote, botched abortions. As an interfaith teacher who tries to learn from multiple faiths, I find it not only contrary to political law, but also against God's law, that one loud group of so-called Christians have co-opted this issue to the dismissal of all other faith traditions. So what do? How do we respond? I include all women in my morning prayers. I break silence and talk about this difficult, controversial issue, not to sway another's point of view, but to enlighten. I tell stories of real people to make it personal and to let people know there's another voice in town. I stand in solidarity when women gather to march or protest. And I vote. I offer to drive others to the polls and help them obtain their mail-in cards, whatever we need to do. I'm going to close today with quotes from a theologian named Jim Palmer. He left Christianity to follow Jesus. Let me repeat that. He left Christianity to follow Jesus. My spiritual practices have led me to feel much the same way. If you're struggling with that too, I offer these words from Jim. Christian should be about following the teachings of Jesus, and no one does that perfectly because we're human, because we have honest disagreements as to what Jesus taught. Sadly, some make being a Christian about adhering to certain beliefs about Jesus. This happened fairly early in Christian history. Then later, some made it about adhering to certain beliefs about the church. Even more recently, some have made it about adhering to certain beliefs about the Bible. Jesus supposedly said something like, "If they're not against us, they're for us." And he supposedly said a lot about not judging. Jesus seems to have been radically inclusive, except for the religious hypocrites. Christians do well to follow his example. Christians should be able to agree on his basic teachings, which focus on love, forgiveness, mercy, and justice. And I believe that includes loving the women whose lives are in turmoil and need to move beyond a pregnancy. Let's pray. Holy God, who shows up in every person I meet today, I come to you with heaviness. Life is challenging and I am stumbling. I'm weary and I want to continue to do your work through my tears and my heartache, but I need help. Give me the wisdom and presence of mind to make mature decisions and to do what is needed. Move me forward to greater understanding of what I must do. Draw me close and hold me up, for I feel my knees buckling at the enormity of the problems in the world. Don't allow me to become complacent as evil becomes our norm. Help me to keep my eye on the sparrow, to learn strength from the rushing waters of a river, to learn calm and rest from the oak that has stood in the same spot for 90 years, to learn patience from a tortoise. While I'm working on difficulties that surround me, help me remember beauty by watching the shadows change on the grass as the sun moves across the sky. Help me remember joy by witnessing the barn swallow babies taking a flying lesson from their mom. Help me remember that you are in control, not me. And the world, even though it feels messy and spinning with evil, is unfolding somehow as it should. I will trust this, and I will trust that you embrace me with love and wisdom every day. Amen. Our music recommendation today is a violin theme written by John Williams and played by violinist Itzhak Perlman. May we meditate for a few minutes on all those who face great suffering.